Please be seated. I almost can't sing those words without tearing up. I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. As we come together in that spirit of worship, we need to remember how much God loves us. And at the end of our service today, we're going to come to the communion table, which will really bring it home as we remember that His body was broken for us, His blood was shed. But today I want to talk about the heart. I want to talk about how it fits into our faith and our giving and our serving the Lord. And I want to begin with a question today. And the question is this: how do you respond to an unexpected and extravagant gift? A gift that is beyond what you ever thought you deserved or was even possible. How do you respond? You know, in the course of my life, I've been blessed in so many ways that I could probably spend an hour just talking about the different times and the different experiences, and maybe you could as well. And again, that's part of your testimony. You know, as you share why you believe. And again, I think that course that Jerry is going to be teaching, The Essentials of Faith, is going to be so powerful. Because sometimes we don't know even where to begin and how to relate what we've experienced with the love of God in our lives with the message of the gospel. We know they connect, but we're not always sure how and where. You know, back in 2016, we've been trying to sell our house in Norwich for 3.5 years. I'd been commuting down here and enjoying my time down here, and Lori and I really wanted to move down here, and we just couldn't sell our house. 3.5 years, all kinds of... Now again, for those of you who are Catholic background, who's the little patron saint of selling things? St. Joseph. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Karen. So I even borrowed a little St. Joseph. Now I know this is not a Baptist thing, and if there's lightning and thunder, but I borrowed a little St. Joseph and I buried it upside down in my front yard because I heard that would help. It didn't really help. That was about 1.5 years in. We went 2 more years. So again, I don't necessarily believe, as Pastor Enrique preached a few months back, about luck. I believe in blessing. And so as we were kind of going through that process, all of a sudden, one day, Fritz Eckel said to me, "Hey, I've got a house that might interest you." And I said, "Well, tell me about it." And he told me this house was on Summer Street. And he said, "You know, here's the real kicker. The kicker is that it was built by a former pastor of Central Baptist. And the woman now is at the Elms, and her family is looking to sell the house, and it might be perfect for you." And so we looked at it, and I have to tell you, it was my dream house. I always say, I compare it to, you know, that Miracle on 34th Street, and the little girl that driving by the house at the end of the movie, and she says, "Stop, stop, stop." And that was the house that she dreamed of, and it was for sale, and they were able to buy it. And so that was kind of our experience. And I said, "God, how great." And around that same time, we finally got an offer on our house. And I thought, this is no coincidence. This is a blessing from God. How do you thank God for something like that, where it all kind of came together? There were a few complications, but God worked it out. Or the next year, in 2017, you know, I have, my first 2 cars were Mustangs. I had a 65 Mustang 3-speed, and a 16-year-old. It was really so much fun. I wrecked it. Yeah, I didn't smash it up, but I just didn't take care of it. And then a couple of years later, I inherited my father's 1969 Mach 1 Mustang. And boy, that car had a lot of power. I abused it. I didn't have those cars long, but I always dreamed of having another Mustang. And sometimes I would mention that from the pulpit in the churches and say, "Yeah, when I turn 40, I'm going to get another Mustang." And 40 came, and I was too practical. And Lori, for my birthday, took me outside, surprised me with a brand new red Honda Civic. And then in 2010, I made another move up. I couldn't quite see when you had kids in college and all that. And I went out and bought a Toyota Corolla with a moonroof. But in 2017, I had a friend of mine who knew that I always was dreaming someday of getting a Mustang. And he came into a little bit of money. It's a long story, sad story. And one day he invited me to take a ride with him. He was a car guy, and we took a ride, and we went up to Cooperstown, New York. And he said, I'm going to pick up this car. Will you go with me? And we drove, and we got there. And as he pulled into the lot of this little dealership, there was a red Mustang convertible sitting there, and it had a sold sign on it. He went off in the back. He came back a few minutes later and said, hey, how would you like to take a ride in that car? And I said, yeah. He says, it's got a sold sign on it. Like that's somebody else's car. And he says, no. He says, here's the keys. Let's take it for a ride. And I said, no, we can't do that. And he said, yes, you can, because it's yours. It's yours. He said, do you know, I've been listening to you talk about that stupid Mustang for years. And recently I came into some money that I wasn't expecting, and I tried to think, what can I do? How can I be a blessing? And so he said, I thought about you, and you were there when my wife had a stroke. You were there when my mother died. You came in the middle of the night and you stayed with my dad and my siblings and me. You were there when I was in the hospital battling cancer, and everybody thought I was going to die, and you were there every day. And when my son died tragically, I called you up, and you came. And you spent time. And I thought, how can I ever repay that kind of... And I said, but I was just doing my job. I was your pastor and your friend. I would have done that. And he said, it didn't matter. You didn't have to, and you did. And so this is my way of saying thank you. And so I had tears in my eyes. How do you respond to an unexpected and extravagant gift, a gift that is beyond what you ever thought you deserved or was even possible? You say thank you. You say thank you. And I said thank you a lot over the years since that day in 2017. You see, though, that's what this story in the Gospel of Luke is all about. It's about this woman who had received an unexpected and extravagant gift in meeting Jesus. To set the stage, we find that Jesus is an invited guest to the home of a well-known Pharisee named Simon. He was a leader in the local synagogue, and it must have been quite an affair because he invited all of his friends. On Wednesday night, I attended the Chamber of Commerce's Athena Awards banquet, where they gave out 7 college scholarships to 7 young ladies in high schools, local high schools, and they honored Maria Allen Pucci. The Athena Award was created to recognize professional excellence, creativity, and initiative, giving back to the community and assisting other women in reaching their full leadership potential. Looking around the room that night, the thought hit me that this was a who's who of the people in Westerly and Pawcatuck and in Stonington and Ashaway and Charlestown. And I was imagining, as I was thinking about this text all week, that the party that Jesus attended was pretty much like that. All of the leaders of the community were there because Simon had invited them. They were all his friends, his acquaintances, and they were coming to meet Jesus, who was making quite a stir as he came into town. Jesus always did that. When he came into town, his reputation preceded him. People wanted to get close to him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. Some of them came looking for healing or acceptance. And they all came out in full force. But among them, among all those who were invited, there was this uninvited woman, one guest who slipped into the crowd. And she did something that no one else thought to do. She comes to Jesus and she falls at his feet and she worships him. She never says a word. We're never told her name. But her worship is so profound that Jesus uses her as an example of a way to respond to the extravagant gift of God's mercy and grace. Her tears of thankfulness wash his feet, and she pours out her most precious gift, the alabaster oil, to bless and anoint the Savior. Words alone cannot express the heartfelt gratitude that she feels in her heart. She shows that love for the Savior by doing something that actually goes over the top of what anyone would expect someone to do. And what makes this act stand out is the simple fact that no one else, not even the host, Simon, had the courtesy to do for Jesus what should have been done for everyone. You see, it was common custom for the host to greet any honored guest who came through the door with a kiss. You know, you see I know we have a lot of Italian families connected with our church and our community, and I have seen time and time again, and maybe it's not just common to Italians, but come up and give a kiss, a holy kiss, if you will, welcoming someone. Well, no one did that. And as they went to the table, it was common custom for the servants to come around and wash the people's feet. We see that at the Last Supper. Again, that was another occasion where all the disciples are gathered around the table, and there's Jesus at the head, and they're laying there reclining at the table, and no one's washing the feet, and Jesus gets up to wash the feet of the disciples. Why? Because he loves them. And so no one did that for Jesus when he came in. It was almost as if Simon was trying to walk the line between honoring Jesus' celebrity, if you will, and downplaying Jesus' authority as a religious leader. So Simon carefully avoided every custom that would have been made to make Jesus feel like an honored guest. He was being treated like just another man off the street. Again, the Scriptures tell us that he wasn't that much to look at. It wasn't like he was, Robert Redford, or Paul Newman, or for you younger people, he wasn't. Give me an example of some young hot star. Yeah, I'm too old now, but those are the guys that when I was a kid growing up, But he didn't look like that. So, and I'm sure though that everyone watching Jesus wasn't necessarily a friend. They'd all heard about some of his teaching, which seemed to disrupt their teaching. And I think they were waiting to see how Simon would handle Jesus' appearance. What would he do when Jesus came into the room? This is probably why the unnamed woman caught their attention. Because while they were all standing back, waiting and watching what would happen, anticipating something, she came out of nowhere and turned the banquet hall into a sanctuary. I'm sure there were murmurings as she approached Jesus. You know how it begins. Someone recognized her and they begin to whisper, "Do you know who that is? Isn't she the one?" And so on. And the text tells us that she was a sinner. It doesn't identify her misdeeds. Some suggested it was prostitution or adultery or something worse. But whatever it was, the fact was that she was known to go against God's prescribed laws. She'd been shunned, lost any rights to show up in places where good people gathered, and she was considered unclean by the religious leaders, so she couldn't go into their holy places, their sanctuaries. Even if she were to touch someone because she was unclean, they would make them unclean. So the religious leaders, I'm sure if she had walked by Simon, he would have gone like this. But she comes right up to Jesus. Comes right behind him. No wonder the people began to squawk when she approached Jesus, who was being hailed as a rabbi, and they raised their voices even more when she touched him. Our English translation doesn't give us a true appreciation for how the text reads upon her entrance. It says, "when a woman," in our text, but it literally should be translated, "and look, a woman." You can almost hear the dramatic music play, da-dun-dun. And you can probably guess that some in the crowd who disapproved of Jesus were giddy with the thought that Jesus would then have to rebuke her and condemn her for being so bold to touch him at all. That's what they were hoping for. That Jesus would make a scene, and here all of his followers would see that he wasn't as compassionate and caring as they were saying he was. That he turned down this woman, he rebuked her, he sent her away. It would be the kind of thing that would separate him from all those wretched sinners and Gentiles who found him warm and welcoming. It would give them something to use to put a wedge between him and his followers. But the whole thing backfires. In verse 38 it says, "And she stood at his feet behind him, weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wipe them with her hair and her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with fragrant oil." This woman is a mess, crying unashamedly. You could say that she was repenting, understanding that she was far from God. And this man represented a stairway, a way forward where she could find hope, forgiveness, new life. And as she stood there with Jesus, the tears were coming out of her. And there, with a mixture of the dirt from his feet and the tears and then the oil, the sweet fragrance of her sacrifice begins to fill the room. And Jesus doesn't appear to be embarrassed or upset. Why? Because what she did was an act of deep devotion, gratitude, and worship. What's more, this woman's worship was at first of all intentional and planned. She came in because she wanted to give thanks and to anoint Jesus. It wasn't a last-minute thing. She had thought it out and came ready to act. And second, it came with a cost. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't something she had left over and disposable. It wasn't something that was sacrificial. It was something that was sacrificial. Even more so, it cost her the humility to kiss and wash and dry with her hair the dirty feet of the Lord. She didn't care what others thought. She was only focused on what she could do for Jesus. The scorn and rejection she would face from the self-righteous Pharisees and the dinner guests didn't matter to her because she came to worship the Lord. Her desire was to serve Jesus. And the price that she had to pay was worth every penny, every dollar, every cent to her because she understood who He was and maybe why He came. He forgave her sin, and she became a free woman, born again to live and serve God. There's a song that we used to sing in Sunday school, and it's a song that she could have sang. It goes like this: "Stop and let me tell you what the Lord has done for me. He forgave my sin, He saved my soul, He cleansed my heart, and He made me whole. Stop and let me tell you what the Lord has done for me." That's the song that she was singing in her heart. Jesus saw it, and that's why He told the story He did to all who were in the room. And He says this, He says there was a certain creditor who had two debtors because they couldn't understand why Jesus didn't react. And these two creditors, one owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, the creditor freely forgave them both. A denarius was equal to a day's wages. 50 denarii equaled nearly 2 months' pay. A lot of money. 500, maybe about almost 2 years' wages. And even though there's a big difference in what each man owed, the important thing is that neither of the men were able to pay it. And in those days, they'd go to jail for indefinite amount of time. And they begged His mercy, and the mercy was given. In a supreme show of mercy and compassion, the creditor canceled each man's debt. And then Jesus asked, who will love him more? Or who will be more grateful for the forgiveness of that heavy debt? And there was only one correct answer, and even Simon could see it. And here's the point for us today. Just like the men in the story, we can never repay God for the gift that we received and what Jesus did for us. He paid our debt and gave us a second chance, a new life, so that we can live unburdened by sins of the past. We can look forward to walking with Christ every day that we live and building a new future and a glorious eternity with God. I mentioned to the children, my mother and father, both of them loved the Lord, gave their life to the Lord, and I know where they are. They were building through their lives homes in heaven. And I know where they are today. That's the gift, and how can you repay a gift of certainty like that? How can you ever put a value on it? Well, the good news is that this forgiveness is available to all of us. But you have to know a price had to be paid. It wasn't free. You know, my buddy who gave me the car, he actually paid cash for it. He didn't just get it for free and then pass it on to me for free. And maybe you've had people in your life who have blessed you in ways. And the gift they gave you, whatever it was, whether it was large or small, you thank them. But most of the time, it was paid for. And they gave it to you because they loved you or cared for you or saw your need. And so it was with Christ and God and our forgiveness. When God said, I will forgive you, it cost the life of His only begotten Son, Jesus, on the cross of Calvary. Jesus paid that debt so that you and I would not have to. And that's the message we hear every time we come to the communion table. That His body was broken. That it wasn't just something that happened and He was in the wrong place at the right time. We all know that. He purposely came so that He could give His life and pay the price for all of our sin. And His body was broken for you and me, so that our sins could be forgiven. In a couple of different circumstances, I was with people and we were talking about who would you die for? That was one of the questions Jesus asked. Who would you die for? And I remember one group, they said, I couldn't die for anybody. But then most of us might give that as our first answer, but then we think about the people we really love. I would give my life for my wife and my children. I would step in front of them and take a bullet. If someone came into my house and threatened me, I would fight them off. If they were in a burning car, I would risk my life and I would drag them out because I love them. And that's exactly what Jesus did. That's how much He loves you and me. He said these people are going to hell. Their sin is condemning them forever. And there's only one person who can save them. And I take that upon myself. His blood was shed for you and me. It's no wonder the woman who came to Simon's house that day gave her very best to Jesus. She understood the price that her forgiveness was going to cost. Maybe she didn't know the details, but she had heard His message. Probably heard the tales that Jesus said, this is what's going to happen. And she gave in proportion to her ability to give, and then some. In stewardship season, and I want to ask you what you are bringing to lay at the feet of Jesus. You know, the reason I think we aren't given a name for that woman was intentional. Because I think that God wanted to see us put ourselves in that place. I remember when Nathan came to David. It's another story in the Old Testament. David had sinned against God, and he'd taken Bathsheba as his wife and had her husband killed. Terrible things. And Nathan the prophet comes with a story and says, oh, there was this man and he did these terrible, despicable things. And what would you do as the king? And he says, well, that man deserves death. And Nathan says, that man is you. And I think that's part of the point of this story, is we're that woman. She's not given a name because we can write it off. But all of us stand in need of God's love, grace, and forgiveness. And so I ask this, is your planned giving an afterthought when it comes to stewardship? You know, when I was in college, I would go to church every week, and we had our stewardship campaign and everything. And when the offering plate came around, I would always see what I had left in my pocket. Okay, this week I got $2. Okay, I'm going to put $2 in. Or another week I say, all I have is a 20. Well, I'll give next week because I need this. Or I'll say I got a 10 and 4 ones. Okay, I'll put the 4 ones. Or I'll say I've got 75 cents. And I'd always make that choice by what I had left in my pocket, not upon my gratitude for what God had done. And some of you may be doing that, and I'm not going to say anything because we're all in different places. But the truth is that giving financially, as well as giving of our time and our energy, is always a matter of our heart. Jesus said, where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. So as you prepare to return your faith-giving estimate cards to church this year, in the next few weeks, I hope you'll ask yourselves two questions, the same questions that this woman in our story had to ask herself. Am I making an intentional decision on what to give? Am I saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to honor and worship and bless the Lord and make a decision. And the second question is this. Is it sacrificial in the sense that it reflects my love for Jesus and how much it cost God to show His ultimate love for me? Am I just throwing something in the plate? Or am I trying to let my offering of my financial gift, my time, my talents and dedication to the ministries in the church and in the community, am I intentional in that, and does it show my love for God as what He's done, show His love for me? We're going to come to the table now, and as we come to the table, I think we often say that this is how we tell the world what Jesus did and how much He loves us. And I want to invite you as you come to the table to really reflect on it. Some of you who are here today or maybe watching online are saying, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to be intentional in living and giving and sharing. And that's great. But some can say, you know what? I can do a little better. Because when it came to giving, God gave all in Jesus, His Son. He didn't hold anything back. May we reflect upon that as we continue in this season of giving. And may we be thankful like that woman who poured out her heart at Jesus.